Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome to another episode of Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today on Digital Builder, we will be discussing how one company in the United Kingdom is tackling very big challenges like the perception of a career working in construction, supporting mental health in our workforce, and why the idea of psychological safety is a critical topic for the future of our industry. So to help tell that story today, I'm joined by Amit Oberoi, the Executive Chairman of the Considerate Constructors Scheme. Amit, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, man?
I'm amazing, Eric. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's been a great few months. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure, and everything we're going to talk about today is so important. And I feel like we're at this interesting crux where we're talking about it more, and I'm very thankful for it, and for you coming on and sharing your perspective and some of the great work your organization is doing. But before we dig too deeply into construction, I've got a sidetrack. So everybody listening, bear with me, but I think it's going to be a little bit of fun. So I was peeking around on your LinkedIn profile, and I saw a role that you were the National Risk and Compliance Manager at Motorcycling Australia. And some of our listeners might have picked up on the fact that I'm an avid motorcyclist. I've ridden motorcycles around half the world. So can you tell me about that job? Because that just sounds really cool.
I think you can add investigative journalist to your career title there, Eric. It's a long time ago, but yeah, I guess, I started off in sort of infrastructure, and we were doing a lot of sort of asphalting and roadworks, and I was sort of headhunted by the organisation, and, they put on events such as like the World Superbikes and the MotoGP, and I thought, wow, this could be amazing. Practice what you preach, go and work in another high-risk industry and see how you go. And I tell you, it was an eye-opening experience because they live and breathe high risk, as we know. And I'll give you a little anecdote of a story. I remember going into a safety briefing with the safety officer of the event, said, look, you've got to go and meet the riders. And I went in there and they said, oh, this is Amit Oberoi, the risk manager. And then Valentino Rossi got up and he said, no, we are the risk managers. And I had a good chuckle. We had a good laugh.
I love that. It's true. I mean, the margin for error in things like MotoGP and World Superbike is incredibly narrow. And there is some applicable context, I'd say, to the construction industry as far as just narrow safety margins, sometimes narrow just margins in general as far as profit and such goes. But I love that anecdote because what they do every day is just pushing the edge. I've had the privilege of doing some track days with friends in the last 3 or 4 years as well, and it's just a different level. And I'm just a dude just riding around a track because I think it's fun. I'm not, Valentino Rossi by any means. And just hearing, firsthand how crazy some of those guys are. That's cool. So thank you for sharing that. That's a pretty neat a role to have amidst some of your construction and other parts of your background. But let's pivot back to the mission of Considerate Constructors Scheme, or CCS. And can you tell me a little bit about the role or your role in the mission, and how you ended up here?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I guess if I take sort of listeners on the path, the UK industry's undergone a lot of change, and there was a Latham report in 1994 which gave about circa 53, 54 recommendations. It was all talking about inefficiencies with practices, as we know, but nothing's really changed, really. But in terms of being fragmented, sort of lacking respect for employees, not looking at the public, lack of concern for the environment, not sort of having that collaborative approach, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the sort of areas was, look, we need to improve the image of construction. So it's quite future thinking. And then in 1996, we were then created as a vehicle to create some standards and a code of considerate practice very, very similar to akin to saying having a ISO certification, if you would say, and then have assessors. So our real mission was to improve the image of construction and make it something to behold and look at and say, hey, this is a pretty good industry. Let's be honest, it creates a lot of jobs. And
Yeah.
we do care about our environment and we do care about the people and places. And that's essentially what we do in a nutshell.
And it's such an important focus, and I'm really encouraged to hear that there's an organization so focused on this in the United Kingdom. But I've spoken at length on Digital Builder about the perception challenges that construction has. I think I stole that framing from Josh Bone from Electri, and it's becoming progressively more true in that the perception is so inaccurate in what folks actually do when they work for construction companies now. And especially with this increasing uptick in available technology that we're using on project sites, that narrative is changing even further. So I appreciate the fact that your team is, very deliberate about this. But you mentioned a code of considerate practice. Could you tell me a bit more about that and how you support the industry through that? I guess documentation, for lack of a better framing.
Yeah, sure. I guess it comes to anything really. If you want to make improvements, you have to set the ground rules, right? You have to have a standard that everyone can work to. So everyone's playing off the same playbook. Um, so essentially, we've got the Code of Considerate Practice, which covers the three critical areas as the Latham report wanted. It was really about how we engaging with the community. So that's a lot of the social value and public investment. If you are building in a public setting, you are building in a neighborhood, are you engaging with the public and your stakeholders correctly? So I think that's critical. And then obviously the environmental discussion, this is forever in the day. We've been talking about environment. What are we doing to progress our carbon footprint? What are we doing to look at that whole utilization of energy? And are we getting smarter with what little of what we have? So that covers it in the code as well. And then I think the critical area, which we're seeing more of that now, is how do we manage our workforce? How are we engaging with our workforce? And how do we care for our workforce? And so we've got those three areas. We've got a question set, and then we've got circa 100 assessors in the field, or monitors as we like to call them, that go out there and then actively engage with the sites to work with the site managers, the foremen, the superintendents, the supply chain to, it's a bit of a role of, hey, education. Can you do this? Can you do this a bit better? Have you thought about this? I saw another site do it this way, or there's some best practices that we've seen in another part of the world, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other part is to actually score them and to say, hey, you're doing this well, but you could do this better. Or, hey, well done. You've just scored 45 out of 45. I really want to broadcast that to the wider network. And so I would say it's a lot of giving people the kudos for doing the right thing, and the ones that aren't there, right, finding out why they're not there. Is it an education? Is it an awareness? Is it lack of resourcing? What is the issue? What's the stopgap? So, because overall, we get valued always on our lowest performing sites. So it's about bringing everybody up to the right required standard.
There's so much to unpack there, but I appreciate the framing so very much. And I mean, construction is one of those industries that touches every human in the entire world to some degree, even if they don't think about it. Because you live in a house, you go to work, you go to businesses, everything is tied to construction, and the community part is so big. And I appreciated your point a minute ago about how you're engaging with the community around a project site, because let's be real, oftentimes when somebody discovers a new construction project is spinning up near their home or their business, the initial response might not be terribly positive. And so I think that active engagement with the community changes that, but that maps directly into the environment and then also the folks that are actually working there. And I also liked how you are celebrating people doing well, because that's not something I've heard talked about as much, at least at a broad level outside of potentially an individual organization. But I think the importance of highlighting those wins, even if they might not seem as exciting of a win if people are just doing what they're supposed to be, that I think that celebrating moment really does reinforce the value of what people are doing. And that workforce care comes down to, how do you take care of your people from a health perspective, but also how you manage them, how you empower them at work. There's so many layers of this. And so it's neat to see it formalized. I I'm curious, how did the different organizations across the UK become involved with or work with your organization? Is it a partnership, or what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because obviously we've been around 25, 26 years now. We worked really in concert with our stakeholders. So we would have a lot of our stakeholders sign up for the scheme because they really believed in what we were doing, what we were
Mhm.
achieving. And because we're independent, we have no bias. So I think that reward and recognition part is massive. It's a tough industry. We know we hear a lot of things about, the economy and, with the inflation and everything going on and things are becoming quite untenable to some degree. We're about saying to people that we value what you do and we can showcase that. But it's also working with us to improve our standards too, because we want to take the industry in a forward trajectory to also improve the image really so that, hey, the next generation says that's a great industry to be part of, not what's currently sort of happening where it's the last port of call, it's the last resort. So it's always sort of having these great conversations with our stakeholders to say, look, we know it's tough, we know there's so many pressures on you, but if we can get this right and we can work together in concert and in collaboration, we can then bring more people into the industry. And COVID was a great catalyst for that because a lot of people were sitting at home and saying, "Hey, why is that industry still allowed to work?"
Yeah.
And that
And I
just
think
shows
we
how.
learned a lot during that time as far as how we can augment our safety conversations as well, because it introduced such unique challenges at a moment that forced a lot of change, both with technology adoption and process adjustments. But I think an example that I had heard when everything was really spinning up was, how do you enforce some of the social distance expectations when two people are carrying a sheet of drywall or sheetrock, and that piece of sheetrock is not 6 feet long? Like, how do you manage that? It's like weird little small things that all start to stack up when you're thinking about the safety aspect. But I think many of those learnings are still applicable, even though circumstances have dramatically improved in the last few years. And I appreciate the constant evolving, look at how we can evolve and improve our safety standards. And part of that just maps back to community and conversation.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people talk about the industry; they've got some level of perception issues when I talk to people, that are outside the industry. But I can tell you now, it's dynamic. The ladies and gentlemen working in the industry are smart. They'll come up with solutions around things. They'll work it out. I mean, it's the only industry that I can think of that you have people come in with a low skill set and people with a high skill set solve complex problems. And I'm just amazed by that every day, that it's an industry whereby you will create a go around, you will create a workaround because that's what you do. You're thinking on your feet constantly. So there was a lots of shared lessons learned, I can tell you. I'm sure we could talk
It's
about that today.
it's such an interesting evolution of our community, and I think that's one of the coolest things about construction from my perspective is the willingness to share and engage and talk about these issues and challenges in a way that helps others solve and build on them, because this is not a single company's challenge to solve all of the big issues we're dealing with in the industry. One organization, one country, one region will not solve these challenges at large by themselves. It's something that needs a lot of collaboration. John Fish, the CEO of Suffolk Construction, I had him on the show alongside Jim Fish, or Jim Lynch a few episodes back, and that one's worth a look at because he talks at length about that. This is not just one company. This is our industry coming together to grow. But I think that leads into my next question for you. I'd be really interested to hear more about how you feel, or what you feel that our industry leaders are doing very well right now to support their own teams and the construction industry at large. Like, what do you think is, just in a good spot right now within the AEC industry?
Yeah, I think honestly, them being able to still maintain their workforce, given we were thrown into that remote working, and still being able to engage heavily. Like I've been on a few sites of late, and the engagement levels within the site teams are back, like COVID never existed. So I'd say engaging with their teams and getting people, ready for work. I would say dealing with the pressures of the supply chain and lack of material supply. Throw another hurdle and throw another obstacle the construction industry's way, and they're back on top of it.
Our procurement friends have always been very resourceful, to say the least, and that has just amplified in an insane amount in the last 3 or 4 years.
And I guess the other element as well is just keeping abreast with the digital implementation and looking at ways they can do things digitally. Whether that's the twin, whether that's a digital twin discussion, or whether that's investing more in some other BIM type of products or software solutions, or just looking at how they can evolve from a digital compliance point of view. I would say these are some of the initiatives that organizations are doing quite well. So they aren't laggards anymore. They're sort of actually thinking about what's the future going to hold. How can I use modern methods of construction? How can I look at investing in the future pipeline of X, Y, and Z material? What's the impact of this material going to have on our structures and buildings? So it's that future investment piece.
And I think that rapid acceleration of digital adoption that we've had in the last few years it's a tremendous silver lining that's come out of some of the challenges. And I'm appreciative of it in the sense of it's an inclusive pivot for the construction industry. So I've worked at two very large general contractors, and I've met many leaders in those moments that equated productivity to butts and seats. And that was the measure. Like, are you there? Are you doing the thing, even if you're not out in the field? And I'm appreciative of the fact that that narrative is starting to shift right now, because it opens up opportunities for people who may not live in urban areas. It opens up opportunities for folks who have very strong skills with data analysis or technology to have this more impactful role, even if they're not always on the project site. And obviously we're builders. The industry is building things, so we have to obviously be at the project site. But there's this very unique balance that we can find right now to also reduce the amount of folks who happen to be on site at any given moment. And as you well know, the more people that are crammed into a small project site, the likelihood of safety incidents goes up as well. And so you get to manage so many different things in different ways. And obviously, we have a lot of runway left as far as fully digitizing the construction industry and eliminating paper on our project sites. But I'd say today we are far closer than we were in 2019. So it definitely a silver lining.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think it's getting to understand your workforce and know the people in your organisation and know the roles that you require. It's that future gazing, sort of looking down the pipeline to say, hey, we need certain types of people on projects. Otherwise, we're not going to build anything. But we also need strong back of house, data analysts, digital, people that understand that technology. But getting the balance right, where some people have lower literacy rates, so we still need to have some paper-based systems as well. So you get the balance. It's all about the right balance, isn't it? Really, getting the mix
absolutely. Right. And I think as we just continue this digital shift, we're just more empowered to have more information at our fingertips to make decisions, and it's just an evolving journey. It sometimes, I think, is scary for folks because they look at the sheer amount of data that they are now capturing. But I think if you're being deliberate about the data strategy you implement, and we released a research report, Harnessing the Data Advantage in Construction, a couple of years ago that talks about this specifically, like picking your focus areas as you evolve how you capture data and handle it, instead of trying to boil the entire ocean at once, makes all of this feel a whole lot less overwhelming for those that are responsible for enacting some of this change. But on the other side of the fence here, I'd be curious to hear what you think might not be going so well in contrast to what you just shared, or things that your organization is most concerned about right now within the scope of our builders in the UK and more broadly.
Yeah, I think the tough one is around really employees and workers. It's around there's lots to talk about. Unfortunately, the suicide that's happening in the industry, people burning out or people coming in and they're not staying in the industry, and they're not attracting enough talent. And I think that's a bit of been a problem since Adam was a boy. It's an issue. It's a perception issue, but also the fact that we are having a lot of people taking their lives, and that's a hard pill to swallow when people in the industry that have taken their life, and it's tough. It's really, really tough. But we are an industry that accepts people from all backgrounds, and we have some people that are unwell that come to the industry as well, and it's sometimes we may have let them down because we haven't been able to see those and identify those pressures in their life. And so that makes it very tough. And there's so many people talking about it, and it's sort of time now to let's talk and let's start helping people.
Yeah.
And it's a critical one.
And we're having a shift, I think, right now in that conversation, or for many years, lack of conversation, really, in just acknowledging everything you've just shared at face value for what it is, and making very intentional choices on how to help. And I recently learned a statistic. I believe in the United States, the construction industry has the highest rate of suicide of all industries in the US. And that is devastating. And the more we find ways to highlight these challenges and uncover the root cause of them, the more empowered I think our leaders at these different organizations are to support their folks in a more meaningful way. And a lot of it does stem from burnout and some of the expectations that are placed on our teams. I've always been quite transparent that I work for a number of general contractors, mostly on the bid and proposal side and contract modifications. And the hours I worked and the deadlines and the stress from that ultimately led me to choose to support construction from the other side of the fence in the technology area. But like, I burned out bad. To me, an RFP was, a scary swear word after a while, where it's just like, I don't want another one of those in my inbox. But more often than not, our leaders hadn't necessarily been set up to have these conversations and make their folks feel like they could come and share the way that they're feeling, but also have solutions to how they're feeling too. So it's iterative, and I've got some more questions on this one. I think we can start hopefully offering our listeners some guidance and advice on how to be better, both as an organization, but I think as managers, and then also as individuals, on advocating for yourself. So I'd love to kind of pivot into that part of the narrative today now. And I know it's heavier out there. So for everybody listening, I empathize and recognize that, this is a deeper conversation than, talking about drones or other technology, but I think it's the most important conversation. So when we last met, you spoke about the concept of psychological safety, and we mentioned it a few minutes ago as well. But I'd love if you could explain what that means and highlight why you think that concept is so important and how it maps back to everything we just started highlighting.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic that keeps coming up, but I think, just to put my psychology hat on for a second, this was sort of coined by Carl Rogers in the 1950s, so it's been around for a very long time. For me, it's if you're running if you're doing good business practice, you want to foster, as James Reason would say, and just getting a little bit academic because I think it will help some of the listeners, is that you want to create a just culture. You want people to put up their hand and say, hey, that doesn't look right. Yeah. That doesn't sound right. And when I touch it, it doesn't feel right. Let's do something about that, as opposed to people feeling as though they can't put their hand up because they're going to get blamed for something. And I guess the psychological safety has now moved to the point where people don't feel safe to speak up because if they disagree with the open dialogue. And so we know that some employers embrace that quite well. We know some employers don't. But there's another side of it, was where some employees may use that as a tool against the employer, which is very sad as well. So what I like to say is, do you have an open culture where if something doesn't look or feel right, do you have the mechanisms that people can actually put up their hand? Now, a lot of companies will tell you they do, some don't, but the companies that do it well, there's a different feel in the culture. Even walking on a site, you can feel the morale's different.
Yep.
And you just know it. And a lot of people that have been in the game, you've been in the game a long time as well, you know when you go to a certain site, there's something different on this site. And that's because people will just tell you as it is. And I find that quite refreshing because you can act pretty quickly, you can have swiftly. And also, you've got other employees saying, hey, can you pull your head in? That's, we've got to do it. And that's when you know you've got the right ingredients there. And that's what psychological safety is really what it's about. And I guess that also ties into the whole discussion around diversity, neurodiversity. It makes good business practice to have people from different ways of thinking working together to solve complex things, because that's just good business practice, right?
Oh,
Having
absolutely.
different people thinking differently, coming together. And so that all of that establishes conditions for fostering creativity. And that's actually what Carl Rogers was saying in the 50s. If you want great things to happen, you need to establish the conditions. If you establish the right conditions, people feel as though they're individuals, they foster creativity, and you get better outcomes and outputs. It's pretty simple, but I think we've unfortunately we've lost the essence of some of these terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I just wanted to provide a little bit of the background.
No,
On that.
it's an important baseline, because I think folks need to understand what we're advocating for when we use terms like that. And sometimes there's narratives that get wrapped up in here that aren't necessarily earnest in what we're trying to achieve. But I think the core of this is really building this culture that actively encourages that open dialogue. And if you think about it in the lens of construction, especially in the circumstances of today with accelerated schedules and labor challenges and materials challenges, if you haven't defined and very clearly told your teams, you go, if you don't feel good about this, or if this is concerning, tell us, and it's okay for you to tell us. They might not ever realize that. Folks might not understand that you want to know unless you tell them on the nose and do it repeatedly, that it's okay to share that. Because as you alluded to a minute ago, folks might think, okay, you were the one that sounded the alarm, and now our schedule duration just got pushed out by 5 weeks because we have to address this thing that we probably could have skated by, but we absolutely shouldn't have because it is a safety risk or some other, risk that's brought to the project. And I've worked for teams that do this well, and I've worked for teams that don't do this well. And I remember very, very clearly the first time I sat in a room with a leader who was doing exactly what we're talking about right now. And I'm going to call her out too, because she works at Autodesk. Her name's Allie Scott. I've had her on the show a couple times. She's an incredible leader. And hearing her step back and tell our team, even though it was just our smaller marketing team of maybe 15 or folks or something like that at that particular moment, that this is a safe space to share how you're feeling, how you're doing. She actively wants to know. She's there to support. In the way she spoke about this, and the fact that it was repeated multiple times at different opportunities and different meetings, and that messaging continued to come forth, made it very clear, and it made me feel very comfortable in being transparent in a way that I hadn't before, because there was always in the back of my head that moment of like, okay, is there a gotcha coming? Like, if I tell you this, okay, in the moment we talk about it, we'll figure it out, we'll fix it, but what comes next? And when you can be confident that there isn't a gotcha, regardless of the thing that you're sharing, the willingness to be transparent is so much more likely. But I think also another point you made a moment ago about the decision making. Everybody wants to have the information to make the right choices. And if you're keeping information to yourself out of some concern for risk of, to yourself or the project or something that might, bring a problem to you later, that's a problem, because your project executive needs to have that information. He needs to know so he can make some changes to address the potential schedule slippage. It's with so many constraining factors on our industry, any hesitation to be transparent, both within just regular construction opportunities and operations or with somebody's health, whether it's physical or mental, I think does everybody on the team a disservice, including the owner and the customer at the end of the project. It's a lot, and it's a difference if your organization hasn't been working that way. But I think the ROI is huge, and it just does better for your people.
Yeah, no, well said. I think a lot of people are probably listening and saying, well, that's all good theoretically, but I guess I was lucky enough to have quite a few great leaders when I was starting off, being very wet between the ears. Still am to a degree, and they just said, look, when you personalize things, so I want you to go out and find out 2 or 3 key parts of information about family members, or do they have a dog? How many children do they have? And when you start personalizing things and people see the care and concern you have for them,
Yeah.
they will then come and tell you what's going on.
Yep.
Oh, this bit of equipment doesn't work. The hydraulic is broken on this, or this has not got enough lifting power, or I've got issues with my crane crew, or whatever it is. They'll come to you and be more open and honest because they feel that personal dialogue. And I think there's some good lessons to learn if anyone's interested in the Paul O'Neill Alcoa experience when he joined Alcoa, and he talked about worker safety is tied to productivity, and I'm going to focus on that, and then we're going to be more productive. And there's some great lessons in that, because that's essentially what it is. It's becoming more personalized, getting an understanding of your workforce, knowing who they are, what makes them tick, and then being able to say, hey, without you, I can't produce X.
Yeah.
So you're the magic ingredient in the equation. Let's work together to produce that. But you tell me, what do you need? And that's a totally different conversation, right?
Absolutely. And I think as we kind of evolve this now, you start being able to highlight again the nuance you shared a minute ago of the diverse teams, and the teams that are transparent are also the teams that do better both as people but also as an organization. And there's a profit margin conversation mixed into there as well, which isn't the one that feels as nice, but there is also a business case for treating your folks well and, helping them manage challenges thoughtfully and equitably out on the project or in the office or wherever you happen to be. But this kind of tees up my next question. And I alluded to this a minute ago that I've danced in this space myself. And, burnout is this super common topic, regardless of where you're in the world you are working in the construction industry. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about how companies can be better about managing the expectations placed upon their teams and help avoid burning out their employees, because it's real. I mean, I don't work for a general contractor anymore for a good reason. I burned out, and I would love to find ways to avoid having other folks be in that same position, because it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, again, to make it really practical, you need to know your workforce.
Yeah.
You need to be getting an understanding of what's happening with your workforce. If you are doing project reviews on your construction projects, how is the performance month to month? I always used to say, why is this project that's 2 or 3 miles up the road from the other project doing better? And I can tell you, it was about the people.
Yeah.
They were engaged. They were managing their health. We know that the construction industry the workers have poor health. So is it a fact of looking at how you can do that? And I think it comes from taking a longer term investment in saying, look, I know a project will last for 2, maybe 3 years, but let's take a 5-year view. What is the health of our workforce?
Yeah.
Do they have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera? At some point they're going to burn out because their bodies aren't as resilient as they were when they were 22 as opposed to, 45, 50. And that's the longer term view organizations have to take. But then also conversely saying to the employees and workers, hey, we're going to invest in you over this 5-year period, but we expect that you turn up and do X, Y, and Z as well so that you can meet us halfway. And I guess that's the relationship view we need to look at, because there's so much employers can do, but if people don't turn up, then that doesn't help them. But then understanding the workforce to say, hey, and also then articulating that to say, hey, we are going to invest in you now. You're critical to our operations, but you need to meet us halfway, and we need to take a step in the right direction is the only thing you can do, because otherwise it's all lip service and people just don't buy into it.
And I think right now with the ongoing challenges with regards to, just retaining and acquiring talent, that 5-year focus that you're sharing instead of the 3-year project focus is a huge differentiator, because if you've shown your people that you care about them enough that you intend to retain them for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, however long they intend to stay in the industry, it's a very different conversation from the organization who, the moment the project ends, they lay off all of their staff until a new project spins up, and then they bring them all back. And I recognize that that's a challenge. There's a balance as far as how you manage your teams. You can't have, hundreds of folks on staff if you don't have new projects to put them on. That's not sustainable long term. But I have seen, even before the talent wars, for lack of a better framing, because the competition is so fierce, really started spinning up. Seeing the way folks felt when their project was coming to an end, and knowing that if there wasn't another one already on the back burner that was about to spin up, that they knew that in 2 months, 3 months, maybe 4 months, that they very well might be laid off. That impacts how well people work, that impacts people's health, both physical and mental. And it also impacts your business, because those people might also be more inclined to entertain offers from other companies who do have that 5-year vision, that 10-year vision, and intends to retain. And just the cost of training a new person, if you've lost somebody, is tremendous, not to mention if you can't fill the seat right away or find somebody. And so there's so many layered personal reasons why supporting your people matters, and then also very clear business reasons as well. It's all intertwined, and I think we can certainly do better than we have historically. I'd be curious, do you have any advice for, past me who was burned out and not telling anybody about it, how that they can better manage those feelings and hopefully communicate them with their managers?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who know me will always say health is your wealth. It's the only thing that you truly own, right? It's your own health, and I think you need to prioritize your own health, but also being it's taking the own internal resilience to the next level by saying to your manager or someone, look, I need to take some time off because I'm feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
I haven't met anyone to date that's in perfect health that's burnt out. I've met people that have really put their health as a secondary to their life, and then lo and behold, 1, 2, 10 years later, they're burning out, and they don't know why.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is it's because of the employer and that, but it might have actually been something that was building up for some time, and it was just a domino effect that happened. And it's sad that it happened at that point, but it also, what did it do? The positive is that it made you stop. So when your body's had enough, it just stops, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to recover. You've got nothing else that you do. You're in fight and flight. You've got to survive. So your body just shuts down and says, "Hey, I'm not having anything to do with this now. You need to recover." But that's also sad on your team. That's also sad on your manager, because other people take that quite personally and they think, "Well, why did that happen to Eric? Geez, I must be doing something wrong." But that could have been building up for the last 5 years before that, or 3 years before that. So for me, really, I've been there as well. I call it, vanity over insanity. I started losing my hair, and I started to ask the question, why am I losing my hair? It's because I was getting to the point where I was highly stressed for a long period of time, and I just took a step back. And I don't care about having not hair. I just wanted to make sure my health is right. But I was going to the gym highly stressed. I was stressing about my teams in the field. I was stressing about everything, and I thought, when I'm going on holiday, I'm stressing out. Like, you can't live like that. So it's a matter of understanding balance, so that when you have time off, you have time off, and you come back recharged to do the job.
Yeah.
I see a lot of people that when they're at work, they're dreaming of having a vacation. When they're on the vacation, they're wishing and dreaming of work. And look, we're all a little bit to blame for that. But it's truly switching off. If you are on vacation, switch off. You need that time to recover, because your workplace needs you. You're a critical cog. So it's understanding yourself. And I think when you get a little bit older, you understand yourself a lot better than when you're younger.
Absolutely.
You're not so kind to yourself when you're younger. We've all been there, Eric. It's
bounce back a lot easier when you're 22, as you mentioned a minute ago. I'm 38 now, and I look back, I go, I wouldn't have been able to do that now.
All the sins of your 20s catch up with you in your 40s. I can tell you that right now. And So it's just be it's a bit of a cliche term. Be kind to yourself to a degree, but also push yourself. It's good to be a little bit uncomfortable, but understand what that means. Because if you're a critical player in your company and you fall over and have burnout, a lot of other people are probably looking and saying, "Oh my God, Eric's the person that I need. He's the person I look up to. He's the person that supports me. Now he's gone. Oh my God." That has a profound impact on other people. So, what I generally say to people is, when I'm out there doing my other business practices, is look, spot the signs early, take a step back, get an understanding that you're part of a bigger picture here. You know, you can't work 24 hours in the day. You need to have a bit of downtime and be flexible with yourself as well. But also, what's your nutrition like? Are you getting some exercise? We all know it's a busy environment, but carve some time out for yourself and you'll feel a lot better.
Yeah, I think folks that figure out where their boundaries should be and where their personal limits are manage this better than folks that don't. And speaking about, the United States has a very strong emphasis on work at times, and there's a narrative, especially as you come out of school and you're early in your career, where it's you got to grind now. You've got to grind now so you can prove yourself and climb up the ladder. And I want folks who are in that position just to step back and just make sure they're being mindful of what they internalize, what that means, because working yourself to death is most certainly not the thing that's going to bring you up the ladder, especially in such a challenging industry like construction. But I think all of this really does map back to finding out how you can be the best advocate for yourself and building your relationship with your manager as an individual, so you have established that you can communicate when you're feeling the way that you might be if you're headed towards burnout or things aren't going well, or maybe something's happening in your personal life that's impacting work. Like, we are people. We're not robots. We're not machines that are just, dropped at an office or on a project site or, wherever we were, and everything not happening during work for your 8 or your 10 or whatever hours you're expected to work doesn't matter for that window. That's absurd and not true. There's no way you can fully turn all of that off. And so finding ways to offer the flexibility you mentioned, I think, and also just checking in with yourself is super important. I most certainly didn't do a great job of that as a younger person. And I'm very thankful for leaders and just experience in what that's given me in feeling comfortable in communicating that now. So, take your vacations. Please take your time off, especially, those of you in the United States. I think there's some crazy statistics about how much PTO people are offered that they don't even take advantage of because they feel some obligation to their projects or their organizations. But as you so thoughtfully shared a moment ago, if you're not taking care of yourself, the long-term impact of that on the business isn't a positive one. And so I think it's a balance. There's a lot of responsibility on the organizations to support their people, but also there's some level of responsibility on the individuals to ensure they're taking care of themselves and advocating for themselves at the right moments when, whether things are going well or whether they're not. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about your advice for industry leaders who would like to start having some of these more meaningful conversations about mental health with their teams, or convince their teams to feel comfortable and open with how they're feeling, especially those that have been hesitant to share. I mean, let's be real. Being transparent about the state of your mental health for many years has been stigmatized and, frowned upon as far as talking about it. You push it down, you hide it. There's this mentality of, oh, I'm a tough man, or, whatever, personality you're, being told to have. But like, how do we break some of those traditional hesitations and, let our leaders set up organizations in a way that helps them have those difficult conversations?
It's a great, it's a great question. I don't think I've got the the answer, but what I can say to you, the workforce really looks up to their senior leaders. You see it when you're walking sites. I guess it's the visible leadership. It's sort of walking the talk,
Yeah.
getting getting touch points. I always say this: getting the temperature check, just going and having a conversation, and you see it from time to time when a leader will engage well with the workforce to say, look, we know it's tough, it's been challenging, but also that reward and recognition. I still think there'll always be a stigma. I think this way we are in society, we just haven't evolved enough that, we're all born differently. We all have different genetic structures. We all have our own underlying things in our life, if you want to use that word. But that's what makes us unique. And when we come together, it's when you're in a leadership position, it's about understanding the people that you're working with,
Yeah.
and knowing that they may process information differently. This person may come in and be, really upbeat and full of energy. This person might not be, but they're still working. It's understanding who you've hired in this sort of business to build that thing, and what do each of them need to do. And it's always been difficult, and I've sort of been lucky to a degree. I've had great leaders to watch and learn from, but I've also had some psychological training that's helped me. But I'm a big on data, and it's like, get those touch points. What's working well here? Why is the team working well? But when we changed them and put them in a different place, they didn't work so well. Was it because they were working away from home for extended periods of time? Was it because they had to drive a long distance to get there, so they're already fatigued and that reduced their energy capacity? Or was it the fact that, we didn't have a canteen set up, so they didn't have anywhere to buy food from, so they weren't eating meals? Getting an understanding of all these factors will help understand the health profile of your workforce. But then if people are showing behaviors that's not, oh, Eric seems a bit off today, going having a conversation, say, hey Eric, or hey Amit, you're looking a bit off today. Is everything okay? Oh, well, yeah, I just had a fight with my partner, or something happened to my dog, or my son or daughter, whatever it is. Those conversations go a long way further than trying to destigmatize the industry.
Yeah.
Because people will say, hey, you actually care about me. I just had that recently with a friend. He looked off. He didn't really want to say anything, but I spoke to a family member on the weekend and said, I think he's going through something with a mate of his. So, it's just being a compassionate person will make massive inroads to helping with this whole mental health discussion. Because if people feel you care about them and you show that through actions, it speaks louder than words. And I know it's a cliche thing to say, but people then feel I'm part of something. And I think what's happened is, even during COVID, a lot of people realize that when you're isolated and you don't have anyone to talk to, loneliness really hurts pretty hard.
It
And
does.
that's what we've got to stop doing. That whole loneliness piece. You could be on a site with hundreds of people, but you feel lonely because no one's reaching out. And I think if we just put the arm around, as I like to say to people, just put the arm around someone, get them to open up, that will help. That's a great first step.
I really like that framing. And it's, especially in a very hectic and fast paced environment, if everybody's stressed and short on time to begin with, it's easy for that to kind of go by the wayside a little bit sometimes, where say you've got a new team that's come together, you don't know everybody or whatever, you're just doing the work and you're focused on the work. But I think, I know there is a responsibility of our managers and people who have teams that report under them to really do their people a service, both within the realm of course, the business, but also themselves as people and just the relationships. And, you're mentioning justice earlier, I think really kind of comes into that. But like, even on its, base level, a manager in some ways, they control folks their access, at least in the United States, to healthcare and housing and being able to pay their mortgage and things. And so there's so much that's layered into the relationship between a individual contributor and an employee and the higher managers, that I think it's the duty of the person serving in that managerial role to really understand their people to the degree that their people are comfortable sharing. Obviously, you're not going to go in and try to force somebody to, unpack something they don't want to talk about. But there's a duty to really figure out what your teams need and how you can help them. And also moving those barriers out of their way so they can be successful. I look back when I was, managing a small team at a prior role, and I'd never been a manager before, and I was a bit freaked out about taking the responsibility, to be honest. And I asked a lot of friends of mine who were senior leaders at other organizations, both in construction and not, like, how do how do I take these three or four folks and ensure they're successful, and how do you define that relationship? And it was tough at first. I'd never done it before, but at the end of the day, it was always, what's in your way right now that I can get out of your way? How can I help you? And what do you want to achieve both today and in the future? And if you can have that narrative in that conversation in an earnest way, in where you're able to offer opportunities, you do so, and where you can support people, you do so, and where you get that stuff out of their way, I think it really changes how they feel about work, but I think also just how they feel as a person. I know that's not always easy to approach, especially if you have a large team, you have 10 people that report to you or something, and building that rapport. But I think it comes back to that deliberate messaging that I was talking about a little bit ago, as far as being very frank with folks that they can come to you and you're a resource for them. And I think the rest, comes naturally after that if your intentions are good.
Yeah, no, well said. It's it's it sounds very basic sometimes, and it is. It's just creating good relationships, and again, it's good business practice to support each other. It can be difficult. We're dealing with multi-generational people now in the workplace as well. So certain generations are better at speaking up than others, you know, and there's a different dynamic within those groups as well. But it's about, if you get the leaders going out and actually engaging, people will then be feeling more open to say, hey, this and this and this is what's going on, or this and this and this is how I feel,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And then it's up to the managers to support their teams adequately so they get the right balance. It's all that about balance, and it's not easy, but I think we are progressing in a better fashion. And I think it comes back to what you were saying with Suffolk Construction. It's an industry wide, but it's also a global issue.
Yeah.
What is the best practice? What are some of the organisations out there that are doing this really well that would love to showcase what they've done? I'd love to hear from that if it's in the States or wherever it is. I'd love to hear about people that have had a bit of an issue and then put some intervention in place that then changed the culture so it was looking differently and people felt obliged to speak up. I'd love to hear that as well, because I think that's the thing that we do well at CCS, is that we showcase these efforts so that we can help improvement across the whole industry, so to speak.
And that really builds, because I think when that starts operating successfully at a business, especially an organization that might not have had this type of program or focus or message or culture intention historically, as you start building it out and developing it, and folks start being successful in this and being transparent, and somebody who has always been very hesitant to share or raise a red flag when something's going wrong sees another person do that and not have anything punitive follow that, hand raise, whether it's about the project or a safety incident or their personal well-being, that's encouraging for other people too. So it's you're leading by design, and as you alluded to, the leaders have a big responsibility there. But I think also, just as the broader org starts developing this muscle, and it's a muscle to flex, having deep conversations with a lot of honesty and transparency about feelings or mental health or anything tied to risk within construction. Sometimes this is a hard conversation to have, and if you don't build that skill set and that muscle, it's always going to be difficult. There's some leadership skills I think some folks need to deliver or to work on, obviously, within our industry. That's not going to go away. But I think also, as you alluded to, the multi-generational aspect of construction now, like folks my age and younger are starting to take leadership positions at these companies. And I think there are differing mindsets that are coming with that I am very encouraged by. And I'm excited to see where construction is in that regard in 5, 10, 15 years as these conversations continue to evolve. There's a lot of work to do, but I think there is also a lot of room to be optimistic as we continue to highlight these challenges in a really thoughtful way.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to expectations, right? You need to build something within a given time, within a given budget. But if people understand the expectations they're signing up to, that's going to put you in a great step forward. And I've worked on sites where the site teams will come up with the supply chains like, what are the minimum expectations on this? It might be turn up on time,
Yeah.
might be a simple one like that, because that reduces all the aggro right off the bat. Turn up to your inductions, make sure you bring they have the right PPE. It could be basics like that. I know it sounds simple, but setting these things up right, and it could be those basics, or it could be more complex. But if people know the expectation, then you're already one step ahead. And I think sometimes that expectation is lost in translation, and then that puts a whole compounding pressure on people, and then people do explode because they're only human at the end of the day as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, especially if somebody's
it's
new to a team or a project or something, if you don't set them up to be successful from day one, both in, like you alluded to, PPE and the equipment, and telling them what you expect of them, in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and they know what they're working towards, it's a whole lot harder to step into a leadership role or a very junior IC role where you are still learning because you haven't had somebody who's set you up with those expectations that you're just sharing right now. And so, making assumptions on what people understand never puts anybody in a great position. And so, if you're the individual contributor who's not sure what the expectations are, hopefully you feel empowered to ask some questions. And if you're the leader where your new team member or subcontractor or something looks a little bit lost, seems like an opportunity to step back and go like, hey, are we on the same page here? Because construction is probably the most relationships based industry of any that I've had the privilege of working in at this point, both within an organization, but just more broadly. 10, 15, 20 companies all on the same project in the same laydown area and all competing with this, heavily constrained schedule. It's a stressful circumstance and a very unique one. So I've got one more question for you, and I want to step and think a little bit more broadly, and it's tied to our leaders and just everybody essentially that works in the industry right now. How can we be better advocates for construction when we're speaking with folks who may join us in the future or influence others who may consider a career in the construction industry? How can we be better than we are today?
I think it goes back to promoting the positives. We talk so much about the negatives, honestly. We've got to make it more attractive.
Yeah.
It is a great industry. You make lifelong friends. You're solving complex problems. You've got great camaraderie. We're becoming more diverse. There are hundreds of examples of great things going on, but we never ever showcase it. We start off with a clean sheet of paper, build something, tear the paper up, start again, and we never ever share what we actually did. And I've been talking to quite a lot of our stakeholders that some of them are multinational companies that work globally, some of them are just local providers, and they're all grappling with the same thing. They're so focused from project to project, they never get enough time to step back and say, hey, I would have loved to have showcased this practice that we did.
Yeah.
We were able to do this without disrupting any of the restaurants around us or any of the residents because we did this, this, and this. And I was like, well, next time you need to do that because that is the showcase. Because what you can talk till the cows come home, but if you don't actually document it and then sell it to the community, you're not going to attract the next generation coming in because they'll never have seen what you did. And so we're working very hard on saying let's do more of that reward and recognition piece, provide it to us, and we can then broadcast that out because that's how we can help. It's just showing people that this is a fantastic industry to be part of. Yes, we have areas we need to improve, like any industry, but you can have a career for life here, and you can advance, and you can create amazing buildings and infrastructure and all sorts of things that leave a great impact. And you talk about social value. Well, creating that new hospital, that's had enormous social value on the community that you've just lived in for the last 3 years. but we don't talk about it from that perspective. We're like, oh yeah, we just built another hospital.
Yeah.
But actually, how many jobs did you create? How many extra beds did you have for the sick children or people in the area? Or, how many lives did you save because you created that hospital? So we need to talk more in a positive language than a lot of the negative. Oh, we're having X amount of suicides. We have X amount of X this. And we're not da 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 da. It just doesn't create any attraction value for people.
You're absolutely right. And for folks who work in construction and have for a long time, there's a tremendous amount of pride tied to the work that they're doing. They're, as you mentioned, they're supporting their community, they're building their community. And as I mentioned earlier, everybody in the world touches construction every day, regardless of if they think about that. And so I think we can definitely do better about highlighting the importance and the value of what that is. But I think also that perception comes down to what the work's going to actually involve. And I'm routinely encouraged, even if it introduces some decision paralysis for our technology leaders, in the increase in tech that is purpose built for construction, because there is some cool stuff that you can do and use, augmented reality, virtual reality, drones, laser scanning, all these tools that are now cutting edge and being made for the industry that folks get to use every single day when they're out, on the project site. And obviously, people are still going to be swinging hammers and pouring concrete and, laying foundations and doing all of these things that are more, dirtier, I guess, from the negative perception that some might have. That's always going to be a part of building. But there's so much to be said for, just that level of pride. I remember the first time I did a site walk on a project where I won the proposal, or had a big part in winning the proposal for that. And it wasn't very far along, it just started, standing things up, but it was just wild. And it connected things for me in that moment in a way that it hadn't before, because I'd won lots of proposals, but I'd never had the privilege of standing in front of the thing that we'd won. And it was just really cool to see that. And I know so many builders where, if they've stayed in one community for a really long time and they have built all of these things, you drive around town and they can say, oh yeah, we built that in 67 and this is really cool. And this had this impact and there was a building there. It's gone now, but gosh, that was neat, And that's such a cool narrative. And there's a way to highlight that, I think, in a very positive way that brings a bit more, encouraging attention to, our industry as well. But, it's not just swinging hammers and, grabbing shovels now. It's, are you a drone pilot? Are you a data scientist? Are you great with standardization and, just data in general? Like, all these different roles are coming together. And we're getting better, but there's a lot of work to do to, continue highlighting the sheer opportunity that in your job security is there, because we will always be building and we need people.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we've tossed up the whole thing, a day in a life series of different people in the industry, right? Because I think that's critical, doing something like that, because one of my greatest mentors built the city I grew up in, and he just talked about it. He said, I've left a legacy, for my children, my grandchildren, that I was involved in all of these buildings at some point in my career. I started off an apprentice on this one and did that and did this, and I was like, wow. And that's, you're building a tangible thing in construction. It's not like you're in the virtual reality world where you're sort of building things virtually, which is great, but here you can actually drive past them. You can fly over them.
Oh yeah.
You got people that might visit them. So it is a great attraction, and I guess we're letting ourselves down by not advocating it correctly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a challenge to all your listeners and other people that are out there. Start selling it more so we can get more people into this great industry, because it is a great industry, to be honest with you.
No, I agree. It's such an interesting one. The people are fantastic. People really truly care about what they're doing and the people that they work with. And I think we'll just, continue to evolve that conversation. But I just remember the first time it felt real, because I was staring at the thing instead of looking at, mock-up drawings and a mountain of binders from the proposal submission that we had to hand deliver with 18 duplicate copies. Speaking as a formal federal proposal manager, the nuances there were a little absurd. They've dialed them back in recent years, as we continue to go digital. But there's something to be said about being able to walk over and look at the thing that you've worked on for 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, however long, versus firing off a bunch of emails. There's a little bit of a different nuance to that. So I appreciate your sharing. A lot of very important wisdom, both tied to the visibility of our industry and mental health at large. I think we have to continue having the conversation, and even some of those more, simple things that seem obvious at a glance are very important to continue doing, being meaningful and deliberate and messaging all of these things to your teams at the right moments in the right ways, so they know that they're going to be safe if they come and tell you about something or share something that they're feeling personally. So I've got 2 more questions for you today. And one of them, this is one of my favorites, and I'm curious to hear, what is one tool that you'll always bring to every project you work on?
I'd have to say, unfortunately, it's going to be my phone, only because there's so much I can do on that these days.
Comes back to our technology conversation, man. I mean, think if you're a project manager now, the amount of information that you can get from this thing right here is staggering. And so I think it's a good answer. It's not an uncommon answer, but it makes sense. I mean, the amount of tools we cram into this single thing, when 15 years ago it would have been 20 different things on your desk, your desktop, your typewriter, your tape measure, your flashlight, all these things. And now it's also tied to data and workflows and access to information and such. It's a fully different level, even just from the manual tools. So I think that's fair. So what's the best way for listeners to reach out to you if they'd like to learn more about your organization, or ask any questions, or just learn a little bit more from what you've shared today?
Look, I think LinkedIn's great. Obviously, from the CCS angle, we're highly active on LinkedIn. I think that's the place to be these days. Or if they want to contact me directly, I'm on LinkedIn as well. So feel free. And I'd love to have conversations with any of the listeners. I think this is great. The podcast you're doing is obviously sharing a lot of great thoughts on different topics and emerging technology. So it's been fantastic, Eric.
No, I appreciate that so much. And I'm so thankful that you were able to, take some time to join me. I know they're heavy topics at times, but they're incredibly important ones. And we just have to continue having that conversation. And thank you so much for, being a part of it from the role that you're serving at CCS right now. And so, of course, if you're out there listening, you just shared that if you want to talk to them, head over to LinkedIn or check out their organization. I follow both, and there's always some great content coming out from there. Of course, I am your friendly host, Eric Thomas. So if you want to find me, I am also on LinkedIn. I post fairly regularly about the industry and upcoming episodes. So if you want to take a closer look at some of those assets, definitely go and check that out. Also, if you are listening today on, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you haven't seen our smiling faces, make sure you head over to YouTube, because we are still a video first podcast these days, and every episode will show up on the Autodesk Construction Cloud YouTube channel. So make sure you go over and check that out. And then finally, as I always say, I would be the worst podcast host because everybody says this. So I think I'm just supposed to. Nobody told me I need to, but if you could go out and take a moment to rate the show on whatever player that you're using, whether it's Spotify or Apple or any of the other major players, I would be very grateful. It does make a big difference on the back end, and also just makes me feel nice if I see a review or a new rating that's rolled in. So if you have a chance, I would be grateful if you took that opportunity. So until the next episode, take care and goodbye.